Input levels, recording levels, these are a hill that a lot of engineers love to die on. I was working on kind of a gain staging video and it was getting really long. And I think the input levels, recording levels, that's the stuff that most people really care about or think about when it comes to gain staging. So I thought, why don't I just edit it down to that? Now, instead of me talking about where I like to set levels on a console or for a recording session, I thought, hey, I've got some sessions that were recorded by some legendary engineers. Let's look at where they set the levels. So I've got these sessions in Pro Tools, and let's go take a look. So this first session I have up, these tracks were recorded by Bob Clearmountain. Bob Clearmountain is legendary engineer. These days, we think of him primarily on the mixing side of things, but he's actually been recording even longer than he's been mixing and has recorded a ton of great stuff over the years. These tracks he recorded at Sweetwater. You can find these on the internet. Probably Google Bob Clearmountain winning with Sweetwater. They're probably floating around out there. At a minimum, there's probably an article talking about the session. So I thought, let's look at what kind of recording levels does Bob Clearmountain go for? And I just have opened the Pro Tools session. I stripped off all of the plugins and everything so that what we are looking at are just the levels, the input levels. These meters are set for pre-fader metering. So any of the automation and stuff that you might see happening in here that's not affecting the levels we see, we're just going to look at these levels. Now, there is a consideration when it comes to levels in that not all meters on consoles, in DAWs, not all the metering is the same. There are a lot of different meter scales out there for better or worse. And I'm not going to dig into that too much today. What I am going to show you is in this session, we'll look at a couple of different meters, but for the most part, we're going to sit on this digital VU meter. VU meters are basically, they just show us an average of the signal level that we're dealing with. The thing I like about these is they're going to show us an average, but they also show the peaks as well. So if you are using a DAW or a console with peak meters, which is what most things are these days, you can just look at those peaks, and I'll flip over to the peak meter so that you can see what those levels look like too. But let's dive in. Let's start with the VU meter. So this is an average level of what's coming in. Okay, so right off the bat, we've got our kick drum here, right around neg 20 on the VU meter. In general, with VU meters and digital VU meters, 0 VU on an analog piece of equipment, depending on how your audio interface is calibrated, that 0 VU equivalent typically amounts to either neg 18 or neg 20 within a DAW environment. It's not all the same out there. I personally like neg 20, but a lot of stuff is at neg 18. Taking a look at this level right here, so we've got a neg 20 on the kick, snare drum right around neg 20. We see these peaks though, those are hitting right up near the top. Oh, there was an over on that kick. Let's hop over to a peak meter. I'm going to just flip over to the Pro Tools Classic meter. This is a digital peak meter, which is different from a VU meter. Again, I'm not going to explain these in depth right now. You can Google and find out all about meters, from PPM meters to peak meters to VU to loudness. There's so many out there. So most consoles, though, they're going to have one or the other. And these days, I usually see peak meters. So if we look at these kick drums, kick and snare now. So snare right up at the top, kick drum right up at the top, almost as high as you can get them. Those are the drums. How about some other stuff? So bass guitar, peaks, -3 to -6. Some down here around 10. So basically into this first line of green and then going a little higher. Guitars, we're seeing peaks right around -6. Let's look at a VU meter though. So if we go to the digital VU, now I'm seeing these more average levels, a little above -20, a little hotter than maybe I would record things, but basically right around that kind of -20. Guitars are coming in a little hotter, -15, -16. Why would somebody push these levels a little bit? Well, if you're working with analog equipment, you might want a little more saturation. Sometimes laying into the preamp can sound good, especially with things like guitars, drums, bass. Let's take a look at a vocal. So it'll be this track right here. We're still in digital VU. Again, we're seeing stuff -15-ish. If we hop back over to the peaks, where are those? Now we're seeing peaks that are much lower. Sample peaks. So this is another type of peak meter. You can just see like all of these different meters, they're all going to show stuff a little bit different. That's not confusing at all, is it? Yes, it is. It's really annoying, honestly. If I'm recording in Pro Tools, I typically sit on the digital VU. That way I can see the average, an average that corresponds to what I learned on, which was analog equipment. So that makes sense to me, but I can also see the peak so that I'm not going over, because I never want to go over and clip something on the way in, because there's no way back from that. I mean, there is some tech out there that can fix some of that, but it's really difficult. But you can see these vocals on the VU meter, a little hotter. This is higher than where I would put them for me, but Bob Clearmountain recorded this stuff. So, hey, that's legend number one. Next up, I have some tracks that were recorded by Joe Chiccarelli. This is an Alanis Morissette session. You can find these tracks through my friends at Pure Mix. So let's take a look at what Joe did. Joe is a monster recording and mixing engineer. All right, so right off the bat, let's look at these drums. We are in digital VU meters again. Kick drum right up at the line. Snare drum, peaks right at the line. We've got averages right around -20. This kick sample's a little hot. You know what? Let's not even look at that one. Not going to worry about samples. We're worried about things on the way in. Snare drum right around 20. Kick drum, -20. If we jump over to our Pro Tools Classic meter, let's see what those are doing. Now we see our peaks. Pretty hot, right near the top. Go to the sample peak. Again, basically pretty close to the same as the Pro Tools one. Although these ballistics are cool. I like that. It's like PPM meters. They kind of fall off. Those look kind of like SSL plasma meters. Although this is really this is your SSL. If you ever want your meters to look like SSL plasma meters, PPMs. SSLs had PPM meters in them. But that's a whole other thing. I love the way those look with drums. All right, if we jump down to the bass, we're back in digital VUs, bass amp. -15-ish, a little hotter than that. Bass DI though, right around -20. Peaks up around -5. If we pop back over to our classic Pro Tools meter, yeah, those peaks right around about -6. So they're showing a little lower, interestingly, on the Pro Tools Classic meter. If we go to the sample peak, now we're seeing this is probably a little more accurate of a peak meter than the Pro Tools Classic, I'm thinking. to see what is the actual true peak. And here we're seeing peaks, they're right around 5, -5. Guitars, somewhere between 5 and 10, closer to 10. These are peaks, remember. If we look at the digital VU on these, there we go, averages between 15 and 20. Anything else in here interesting? So, looks like some strings. Boy, these cellos. Oh, that was a bounce. We're not going to worry about those. Let's not worry about a bounce. These staccato cellos right around -25. Analog sequencer right around -20. -20 and 0 VU are just about the same thing. And, you know, looking at this, looking at the stuff recorded by Bob, these guys, they're all kind of recording right around that -20 mark. So maybe that's something to think about when you're setting your levels. Now, these are averages again. Let's look at the peaks. We'll go back to that sample peaks. Seeing peaks, -6, -5. So how about a vocal, though? Let's find her lead vocal. We'll start in the digital VU. There we go, right around -20. Do you think it's maybe a little bit of a sweet spot? If we go to the sample peaks, how hot are these levels coming in? They're up right around -5, -6 on the Pro Tools Classic. They're showing lower. Looking at this stuff today, I am never going to use the Pro Tools Classic meter because it doesn't show the peaks high enough. I want to see overs. I want to see how close am I to actually destroying something. So the sample peak is nice. Digital VU is still my favorite for recording, especially with stuff like this. But on drums, looking at the sample peak, that might be helpful. If you're setting your input levels, though, for recording on a digital live console, this is a good place to put an average, right around -20. That's kind of what we're seeing in these two sessions so far. Let's look at some other tracks. Last but not least, these tracks were recorded by Al Schmitt. What can I say about Al Schmitt? Maybe one of the greatest recording engineers of all time. These tracks available through PureMix, once again, can see exactly how he recorded these in that video. It's really interesting video if you're interested in that kind of stuff. Let's look at some levels, though. I'm going to start once again with our digital VU meters. Here we go. Right off the bat, I can see that these levels are lower than what I saw in the Joe Chiccarelli session and the Bob Clearmountain session. So our snare drum, somewhere between -25 and -30 on the averages. Peaks, though, up around -5, -10. Pretty conservative, not as hot. Kick drum, a lot lower. This is a jazz session, so kick in jazz is a different animal than in kind of rock and pop where the other two sessions were. But, you know, still not seeing lots of hot levels here. If I jump over to the bass guitar, bass DI, right around -20 once again, even a little bit lower on this. The guitar amp, fairly dynamic. Not sure what he's playing. I'm not listening to this in here, by the way. This guitar, a little lower, -25-ish. Wurlitzer's lower, -30, -25. Some horns here, averages closer to -30 even. And then the vocal again, averaging kind of close to -20. This is a pretty dynamic vocal, though. I can tell just because the meter is moving quite a bit. Let's look at a different meter. So I'll go over to sample peak. Now we can see our peaks for the snare drum right around -10. So this is actually a little more conservative than even I would set levels, but it's Al Schmitt. You can't argue with Al Schmitt's methods. At least I wouldn't. I mean, I guess you could, but I think you'd be crazy to do that. Bass guitar, peaking right around neg 10. Vocal between neg 10, neg 15. That Wurlitzer peaks up to around 15. Guitar amp, neg 15-ish or so. Al's levels, for me, a little more conservative than what I personally would do. I tend to like putting things right around kind of that neg 20, right sort of in the middle, and then keeping peaks like I just don't want to clip anything. But that's my approach, somewhere in between all of these engineers. But you can see from looking at all of these different sessions, and this is just 3, they're not all quite the same, but they're all kind of close to that general ballpark where there's an average level in that kind of neg 20 range. Some of the guys, Bob and Joe, might push things a little bit more on some of the inputs, and then Al's got stuff a little bit lower. If there's something that you should take away from this, or that I think would be good to take away, neg 20 in digital world, you could say neg 18. That's kind of a sweet spot for an average level. For peaks, all of these things, they're peaking, neg 10 to neg 6. Drums, things with lots of transient energy, like drums, maybe a little higher, right up to the line for some of these guys. I like putting them a little bit lower because I do a lot of live recording, and when it's live, you can't stop the show to adjust the level and then start the song over. In the studio, it's a little different because you've got a little more leeway if something didn't go down right. Depending on the artist you're working with anyways, you can stop and do another take. It's a little different. That's just me. Something to think about. So I hope this has been informative, interesting, instructive. If you're ready to let me know how you feel about how wrong all of these levels were, I mean, you know where the comments are. Please comment away. If you would like to hear my take on gain staging and more of what is involved in it beyond just setting input levels, please leave a comment. Let me know. I'd be happy to put together a video talking about that kind of stuff. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.